Let's go live now to the Minister for the NDIS and Government Services, Bill Shorten. Bill Shorten, thanks for your time. Let me start with the comments of Jacinta Price during the week around colonisation and Aboriginal people benefiting from it. What do you make of them?
Well, everyone's entitled to their own view. For me, this referendum is about a pretty straightforward proposition. It's about recognition and listening in order to get better results. What's actually being asked of Australians on October the 14th is to correct a lie that our first Australians weren't included in the nation's modern Australia's birth certificate, and we want to include them, and we're proposing setting up an advisory committee. The one thing which I think often gets overlooked in this whole debate, Andrew, is that this was kicked off by Tony Abbott and myself in 2015, where we set up a process. Then, of course, the Liberals did the old switcheroo and put Malcolm Turnbull in. And then there were 12 gatherings of Indigenous leaders and people first, which led to the Uluru Declaration. And now we've been just asked, I reckon, a pretty modest proposition: recognition, listening through an advisory committee for better results. So in the meantime, everyone's entitled to their opinion, but I just think we just need to clarify what this is all about.
All right. Well, speaking of that, I guess Anthony Albanese replaced you as leader. He's your old leadership rival. Are you happy with the way he's handled this? He's been criticised for not putting up too much detail. And does this have any impact on his prime ministership if this goes down?
Yes, I think he's been doing a great job as Prime Minister. And no, it has no impact on the structure of the government. I think it's an opportunity. I think we need to ask ourselves, what do we lose as a people, as a nation, if we don't vote yes? I mean, the reality is that Australians who are not Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders, we lose nothing. The truth of the matter is that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders start behind on every indice that we have in Australia: health, jail, jobs, education, housing. So in giving our first Australians with 65,000 years of connection to country recognition in the modern Australia's birth certificate, that is not a difficult proposition, and I think most people agree. What it seems to have got very controversial is the role of an advisory committee. This nation has advisory committees. We have them in a range of different areas. The problem is, in the past, when we set them up to listen to Aboriginal people, successive governments just scrapped them. Yeah, so we put in the advisory committee tick. It goes.
We don't have too many advisory committees enshrined permanently, though, do we?
Well, the point is, though, we don't have too many other groups of people who, when they've had advisory committees, have been cancelled. And that's what's been happening. I think the No cases are running some clever lines where they say this is a Canberra voice. It's not. This voice was the result of talking to many Indigenous leaders. They don't all agree, but I think quite a lot do, and that's the proposition in front of us. It's far less dramatic and far less worrisome for the rest of Australia than some of the No case are making out.
All right, I asked you about Jacinta Price's comments. Let me ask you about Marcia Langton's, where she's made several comments over the past couple of years calling people racist, including people involved in the No campaign and even No voters. Probably doesn't help the Yes campaign, does it?
Well, the same answer that I said about Jacinta Price. Everyone's got their own opinions. I'm not about to tell either of those women that, you know, they're not entitled to what they think. As a general rule, I have found, though, that telling your opponents or people who disagree with you to sort of go away, we're not interested in what you say, is not a recipe for getting votes. That is true. But again, I don't think the most of Australians are racist. There is a small proportion, that's true, but the vast bulk of Australians are not racist. Again, this is getting almost every issue is being spoken about except the actual proposition, and that's just voting yes for recognition and listening in modern Australia's birth certificate, setting up an advisory committee. I mean, the reality is that the results haven't worked in the past, and it really is a pretty, to be honest, pragmatic proposition. The that before you do something to people, why don't you talk to them first?
All right, Linda Burney made some comments you would have heard there on a hot mic on Friday that she'd experienced racism and bullying in the last couple of weeks in Parliament. What do you think she was referring to? Was she referring to the opposition?
I don't know exactly what she's referring to. I get to sit close to her in Parliament. She really is a believer in the fair go for all Australians, and she's been speaking up on her portfolio for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians. Again, she's entitled to her view. Listen, this is always going to be difficult, and there are the argument about changing the Constitution. But way back in the 1890s, the people who drafted the Constitution put in mechanisms to change it. There are some people who would have you believe the Constitution is set in stone and can never be changed. If that was the case, they'd never have given us a mechanism to change it.
All right.
The other thing which I think people have to realise here is people say, oh, maybe there's a better set of words and a better time. But I would say to those people, well, if we know that the status quo isn't working, if we know that we're not losing anything by voting yes, well, this is a pretty good time.
Voter turnout's been a concern here. What's the penalty if you don't vote in the referendum?
Yeah, someone asked me that the other day. It's $20.
It's not much, is it? It's a fair bit more for not voting in an election. Do you think that could affect voter turnout?
Well, I don't know. But no, the fine isn't high. It's $20. I'm going to vote, so that way I'll avoid the fine. But yeah, no, you're right. No, it's not the biggest amount of money in the world.
Probably favours the Yes campaign in a way, that, doesn't it?
Oh, I don't know. The reality is that it's been $20 for a while, and you know, I encourage citizens to participate in the decision-making of their country. But yeah, $20 is... I'd tell you one thing, Andrew. Whilst it's not much, if you choose not to vote, don't ask me to spring for the 20, that's all.
OK, let's talk about the NDIS and the search by you to stop it overrunning the budget. We've been promised this independent review in October. Will there be meaningful and game-changing reform in that, or will it be you saying you'll crack down on fraud and overcharging and ask the states to chip in more?
I'm looking forward to the recommendations in October. The NDIS is here to stay. We just want to make sure that every dollar in the scheme's getting through to the people for whom the scheme was designed. I think at the 10-year anniversary of the establishment of the scheme, it's now had this 10 years of development and, if you like, adolescence. It's now hitting maturity. I think that there will be recommendations which will reflect listening to people with disability, participants, advocates, providers, workplace reps and all of that. And so I think that it will have a series of recommendations which will return it to its original vision, and we'll work cooperatively with the states. So it'll be more than just what you said, though, I suspect. It'll be a bit more than that, yep.
Yeah, sure. So you've got almost 100,000 Australians a year joining this thing. Do you need to take some conditions out of the scheme to make it work, to make it affordable?
I don't want to preempt the recommendations. What I do believe is that the NDIS was there to look after the most profoundly and severely impaired, and I think nearly every Australian agrees on that. I do think we need to have a discussion in this country that for people whose impairment or disability is not so severe they need massive intervention to help them, but we need to be better as a society, and everything from transport to building design to how our early intervention working for kids with developmental delay, to our school system, to our hospital system. So I think if all of us lift up and change a little bit to include people with disability, I think we can have the best of both worlds, a really good NDIS working in the best interests of participants and a more inclusive society generally.
Is it time we means tested the NDIS as the IMF recommended in February? There's plenty of other government assistance you means test, everything from electricity rebates to childcare tapping out at a couple earning $500,000.
No, I haven't traditionally been a big supporter of means testing. First of all, there's not a lot of people at the very top end who require assistance. But beyond that, disability is also a set of conditions which actually makes you poorer than average to begin with. I think means testing is a lazy reform. doesn't affect very many people. I think the real challenge is to build a more inclusive society. We don't means test our Medicare. We don't means test our education system. I would got to reinforce that I see the NDIS, it's not a welfare program. This is about helping people have fulfilling lives. Any of us could need this scheme at any time, from the birth of a beautiful little child and a non-standard developmental journey, through to the blink of an eye on a country road, through to, you know, early ageing and some of the things which come in our DNA lottery. So disabilities, any of us at any time, and this is for the most fundamentally impacted people. And I think we can improve the scheme without going down the means testing path.
All right, the budget target, your target is to reduce the 14% growth rate to 8% by 2026. That's $59 billion off the scheme, including $15 billion over the next 4 years. Is that achievable?
Yes, absolutely. I think we're seeing some green shoots already. It's the truth of the matter is, and without going too far down the Liberal versus Labor game, my predecessors, I think, did not focus sufficiently on all aspects of the scheme. So I'm confident that if this scheme's given the love it deserves, if we listen to people with disability, if we listen to the participants, I think that, and as the scheme matures, I think we can have a reasonable growth rate, and I think we can get better outcomes for people with disability. You've got to remember, Andrew, this scheme is changing lives for the better, but we need to make it a more consistent experience. And some of the rent seekers who are just in it to make, you know, their profits for themselves and not focus on people with disability, we must evict those rent seekers from the scheme.
Okay, I'm having Greens leader Adam Bant on shortly. Obviously, it was a good deal for the government with them on the Housing Australia Future Fund.
Yeah.
They seem set to continue to attack you on renters. What's your view on how they're playing that?
Listen, I generally think the Greens political party would rather take a vote off the Labor than the Liberals. They sometimes tend to focus on us rather than anyone else. But it was good that Julie Collins and our team were able to strike an accommodation with them in terms of the housing package. In terms of renters, Jim Chalmers in the last budget increased rental assistance for people eligible for it in the biggest amount in 30 years. I think we'll keep working on looking after renters and working with all good ideas. At the end of the day, what really matters is making sure that people are getting looked after, and I think the government's shown that we'll work with whoever's got the best interests of Australians, and if Adam's got ideas which we think can work, we'll work with him, just as we will with the coalition. Although we don't tend to get caught in a traffic jam of coalition limos coming to see us with a lot of good ideas at the moment. Who knows? You never know your luck in Canberra.
All right, before you go, let's talk Qantas. Should Richard Goyder keep his job?
The chairman of Qantas's position is a matter for him and for the shareholders. There's no doubt, though, that the ACCC launching a massive action alleging that Qantas was selling ghost tickets on ghost flights is quite staggering. And I and many other Labor people spoke up during COVID when they unlawfully, illegally sacked 1,700 baggage handlers. You have to ask yourself, with all of these problems, what does it take to make a director at Qantas or a chairman resign? So that's really on them. But you've got to ask that question. If they don't resign, what is a resignable matter these days at the top end of town in corporate Australia?
Finally, we've got this Senate inquiry into the refusal of the government to allow Qatar Airways more flights into the country. Do you think this is an issue the government should reconsider in coming months?
The Minister arrived at her decision after consultation, looking at all the issues. Everyone obviously wants cheaper airfares, but I don't think that it's as simple as just saying, well, that's going to be accomplished overnight with giving the Qatari government what they want when they turn up. Did you know that there was something like 1,857 international flights into Australia in the first week of September, Andrew? So I think there's a range of solutions. I can understand Virgin and Qatar wanting to improve their financial position, but the Minister's got to take in all of the issues, all of the national interest. That includes competition and encouraging other airlines to come to Australia, which airports you fly into, what configuration of aeroplanes. I think a lot of this has been a commercial negotiation where the advocates for a particular deal have done quite a good job at making their case, but the government's always got to weigh up everyone's interests. not just a particular commercial operation sponsored by another government.
Government Services and NDIS Minister Bill Shorten, thanks so much for your time this Sunday morning.
Lovely to catch up, Andrew.